if the concern is that we sound a little too self-important by saying the premier, I'd be happy with a premier. So it's not that we're better than everybody else, it's that we're doing the best. But I think that striving for excellence is really important. And I get that we don't want to say we're better than you and we're better than Fairfax and all of that, but I think we want to say that we are the absolute best that we can be. The one thing I did want to flag, and this is probably something to a little bit more for the work plan, because it's not necessary to add words here, it's captured. But one of the things, and just looking at the audience, we've got all of our other candidates for school board out there, and I think they'd all tell you, one of the things that a lot of the candidates are talking about, and one of the things that I think a lot of us are hearing, is concern about stress among our students. And I think that's built into the caring community and culture part, especially where we are focused on the social and emotional health of our community. But I do think that's an area that for the next few years is going to be really important to focus on, especially with the aggressive and declining political and emotional environment. Things like welcoming Falls Church have become especially critical, and I think schools need to continue to be a haven and an opportunity to teach community in an environment where community and support is not always appreciated.
Thank you for that feedback. I agree. I worry just generally, it's my own stress and my own angst that I have sort of existentially about how our kids are feeling, and I carry a lot of that with me. And so as a consequence of that, we are continuing to look at our own practices internally to see what are we doing that is putting that stress and pressure on students, because the one thing that we don't want to do is make their lives more complicated than it already is. And so if we're doing things that are running contrary to a caring community and climate, it really gives us an opportunity to be reflective. So I appreciate that.
So thank you. First of all, I just want to say I love the new placemat because I do think it's much more user-friendly. And just comparing it to the previous placemat, one of the things I particularly like is that previously we had the 3 goals of deploying best practices, closing the achievement gap, and then ensuring operational efficiency and effectiveness. And I like how you move the operational efficiency and effectiveness off of the placemat, and obviously that's still one of our goals and it's embedded in everything that we do, but I think moving it off of one of the main 3 goals and focusing instead on the 3 things that you have on this placemat. Also, I think that it's easier to read and understand, whereas I think the old placemat just had a lot more to try and digest. And I think one of the things that I've appreciated about the placemat is that it's kind of an intro to the triennial plan. So even if you don't read the triennial plan, you can at least get the gist of it from the placemat. And so I think having it boiled down like this makes it easier for the community to understand, or really anyone who's trying to understand what our values are. And in terms of the caring community and culture, I agree with Mr. Ritker that we do need to continue to focus on that the stress and emotional well-being of our children. And recently, I guess I read an article or something to the effect that there's actually, and this is probably obvious, but higher levels of stress and anxiety in schools that are considered high performing in general. So I think that our SOL scores and how we're doing so well in so many categories and all these different wonderful things that we put in place for our kids are showing to be somewhat detrimental to them, that they're adding to the stress and anxiety. So I think we want to make sure that we're balancing that as we go forward and taking into account like the kind of environment that we're creating, while we're trying to do all these great things. So striking that balance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just pile on to what Ms. Russell, Mr. Reitner said about stress. I was at some doctor's appointment yesterday, and they had the new Arlington magazine talking about our inability to deal with failure in K-12 schools and how early that begins. And it's a kind of crazy article because it has the first article saying we're way overstressing our children, and it's a huge problem. And then it has a guide to private schools and a big ad about tutors and other things. So, we're sending crazily mixed messages. I think IB could be an island of sanity, but I do agree that being a high-performing school division with a bunch of wrecked children emotionally is not a good bargain.
I couldn't agree with all of you more, and it certainly is not our mission or our goal to have a bunch of emotionally wrecked children, and we will work diligently to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, there are some practices and strategies that are in place that are relics that, quite frankly, need to be taken on and taken on by our leadership in the schools and leadership of the division to help us move past some of those relics also that create some of that stress, because we have such a diversified student body that are engaged in the arts or engaged in sports and are doing many things outside of school. Those relics that are in place are also things that we knew coming through school that create stress and create pressure. And as we take those away, we're really beginning to also shift a culture to say that, and I'll use a perfect example, homework. Our kids are crushed with homework because we don't have a really strong, meaningful, thoughtful homework policy that says, here's what the appropriate amount of homework is per night per kid. So we have these kids that are doing a lot of work, and they're trying to play sports or they're trying to do music, and they become very stressed. And then the homework isn't meaningful necessarily either. So we think about the quality of the homework. So those are things, when you start to pull back on that, and this is where it becomes really interesting to me, is you pull back on that, and then there's a push from the community that says, my kid's not getting homework, so this class must not be rigorous enough. And so there's this push-pull that we get stuck in that's almost a culture war between the way school was and the way school can be, and trying to create a circumstance that is meaningful enough for our kids and for our parents to understand that our kids are going to be just fine if we give them some room to breathe, to learn, to think, that doesn't come with 25 multiple choice questions that you have to do every Thursday night or do the odds from 1 to 25. So there are some things that we're looking at that do create some stress and pressure. And one of them, for example, is homework.
Any further questions from the board? Okay, then we will, thank you, Dr. Noonan. We'll move into the triennial plan update.
Thanks. So that sort of dovetails this piece in a nice way, insofar as it becomes the work plan that really sits behind the placemat. Now, I gave you in board docs is the entire triennial plan. I pulled out of the triennial plan just a couple of things that I wanted just to highlight to give you a sense of kind of where we are. But the piece that I want to make sure that is clear is that you're oriented to what you're looking at. And so let me just back up for a second and remind you, not tell you, but remind you that the triennial plan is really predicated on the five priorities, priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which, by the way, I'm really glad that we're in the third year of the triennial plan, because it seems like if you have 5 priorities and you have 3 things on the placemat, there might be a disconnect. So it's a good opportunity for us to kind of go through the year and kind of reorient and spend some time with the triennial plan. But let me remind the board and the community what those priorities are. The first is student-centered teaching and learning. And behind that student-centered teaching and learning, there are 5 strategies that we are paying attention to. Priority 2 is excellent staff, making sure that we have the very best staff. And so there are 3 strategies specifically that are behind that priority. The third priority is optimal facilities and learning environments. And there are 2 strategies behind that. Priority 4 is around strong fiscal management, and 3 strategies behind that. And priority 5 is around community engagement, and there are 2 strategies behind that. So as you dig into the triennial work plan, one of the things you'll see is that underneath, for example, this is priority 1, and it specifically is 1.1.2, which is directly aligned to student-centered teaching and learning and ensuring equity and access to quality core instructional programs and resources for all students. So as you look at this first one, 1.1, the first one in that signifies the priority, and then the 1.1 signifies the strategy, which is ensuring equity and access and quality to core instruction. And then the 2 is like the second work piece that goes behind that strategy. So it's a little convoluted, the numbering system, if you don't have the whole document in front of you, but it would make sense if you were looking at it. So this one is about extending learning opportunities through additional instructional time, extension of curriculum, and enrichment activities. So if you look across the top axis, you'll see action steps fiscal year 18, 19, and 20. We are currently in fiscal year 20. You'll see evidence of effectiveness, evidence of, and that is current status, and then ideal status is next to that, who's responsible, initiation date, completion date, and evidence of progress. So in here, in 2018, we marked ourselves a yellow, and that was sort of a, we're doing okay, we could do better. And then we, in FY19, felt like we met it, and then in 2020, our goal is to make sure that we don't slide. So some of the things that we're doing in the right-hand side of this that you'll see are our evidence of effectiveness, are things like intervention, enrichment embedded in the schedule in all of our schools. So you'll see time in each of our schools that's available. LEAP, which is now ESOL after-school activities that support all of our students at each level. We have a partnership with Capital One Coders that continues this year. We are continuing to provide advanced academic instruction through a push-in and pull-out model. And then we are continuing with our Mustang Rodeo and Wild Horse Wednesdays, are just some examples of how we are extending opportunities for learning within our system. So that's the algorithm that we are using. So this is 1.2.3. So this is priority 1, strategy 2, and that's ensuring that all of our students develop critical thinking and creative problem-solving skills through the International Baccalaureate program. So what you see in yellow on FY18 and 19 is we're doing okay, but we have a lot of room for growth. And so highlighted in yellow, going across on the horizontal, are a couple of statements and a couple of bullets, and those are new this year that were added. So some things that we are continuing to look at is the IB, PYP, and MYP induction sessions for our new staff. So how are we onboarding our new folks into IB? We're also, as I think everyone here is aware, looking at cohort 1 and looking at standards-based grading and professional development, particularly for our teachers. And then if you go across to that evidence of progress, how will we know if we're doing okay? We continue to look at our curriculum for the induction program and continue to work on standards-based learning. So at the end of this year, we'll go back and see, how did we do? Was the onboarding for our new staff appropriate? Did they feel comfortable with it? We'll talk to those teachers that were part of the program, and then we'll also continue to take the pulse around standards-based grading in cohort 1. This next one is, sorry?
Okay, so Dr. Noonan, let me challenge you a little bit on this 1.2.3 and then 1.1.2. 1.2.3 seems really tight and good because it's focus. Like, you know what you're doing, you're training this cadre of teachers, and you know there's going to be another group next year. Whereas with 1.1.2, I mean, is the work ever going to be done on that? We'll always be able to do more there. And do we know if every single student has been touched in some way by our goal in 1.1.2?
It's a great question, and what we've been able to do this year, and even some last year, that's remarkably different than FY18 and previously, is that we've been able to pull out every student that is an ESOL student, every student who's a student in poverty, every student who is a student who is in special ed or has a 504 by name, and are able to provide. I'm trying to think about how to say this in a way that makes a lot of sense. Been able to provide for their teachers information that helps guide their instruction and their instructional programming in a way that's remarkably different